Julia had always dreamed of a peaceful suburban life, where white picket fences framed perfectly manicured lawns and children played freely on the streets. After years of relentless city living, she finally found her sanctuary in Maplewood Grove, a picturesque neighborhood known for its charm and friendly community. However, her excitement quickly dimmed when she learned about the notorious homeowners association that governed every inch of life in her new home. With a warm smile and a box of homemade cookies in hand, Julia knocked on her neighbor's door, eager to make friends and settle into her new environment. But as she chatted with Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman with a penchant for gossip, she learned about the HOA's iron grip on the community. "They're strict, dear," Mrs. Henderson warned, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You'll need to follow their rules to the letter. Or else." The thought of an all-controlling HOA nagged at Julia as she unpacked her belongings. She envisioned vivid flower beds and quirky garden decorations, elements that brought her joy. But the looming shadow of the HOA's regulations made her uneasy. Would she really have to suppress her creativity to fit in? A sense of rebellion began to stir within her as she contemplated how to navigate this perfect yet oppressive paradise. Little did she know, this was just the beginning of a battle that would awaken her inner strength and challenge the status quo of Maplewood Grove. Maplewood Grove was the epitome of suburban bliss. The streets formed a neat grid, lined with majestic oak trees that provided dappled sunlight on warm afternoons. Each house, a charming blend of pastel hues, stood proudly behind perfectly trimmed hedges, their lawns lush and vibrant, almost begging to be walked upon. Children laughed as they rode their bicycles down the smooth sidewalks, while neighbors exchanged friendly waves, nurturing a sense of community that Julia had yearned for. However, beneath this picturesque facade lay an undercurrent of tension stirred by the HOA's presence. The pristine surroundings were not merely a result of collective pride, they were enforced through a stringent set of rules designed to maintain order and conformity. Julia was quickly made aware of how the HOA scrutinized every detail, from the height of grass blades to the placement of seasonal decorations. The association had little tolerance for uniqueness, leaving little room for individual expression. As Julia took her evening stroll, she couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between the beauty of her surroundings and the suffocating regulations looming over them. House after house bore signs warning against unapproved yard decor, while some residents seemed to walk on eggshells, wary of attracting the HOA's attention. This duality filled Julia with a mix of admiration for the neighborhood's allure and frustration at the oppressive control that transformed her dream into a gilded cage. The day of the HOA welcome meeting arrived, and Julia felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. She entered the community center, a modest building adorned with cheerful decorations, and took a seat among her new neighbors. The atmosphere buzzed with chatter, but as the HOA board members took the stage, the air shifted noticeably. Julia observed the 3 board members, each clad in polo shirts emblazoned with the HOA logo, exuding an air of authority that made her uneasy. The meeting began with a scripted introduction, where the head of the board, Mr. Thompson, launched into an elaborate overview of neighborhood rules. As he rattled off regulations about paint colors, lawn heights, and pet restrictions, Julia's initial enthusiasm waned. What had seemed like common sense quickly revealed itself as an astonishingly restrictive list. She couldn't help but feel stifled by their meticulous guidelines. When she raised her hand to ask about the possibility of personal expression in yard decor, Mr. Thompson's condescending smile did little to reassure her. "We appreciate creativity," he said with a patronizing tone, "as long as it aligns with our approved standards." This offhanded dismissal stung more than she expected and reflected a mindset that left little room for individuality. As other homeowners nodded in agreement, some looking fearful to speak out, Julia felt a spark ignite within her. The rigid demeanor of the HOA members only fueled her resolve. If they thought they could suppress her spirit so easily, they were sorely mistaken. As Julia settled into her new home, she began to notice the myriad of bizarre rules enforced by the HOA that governed daily life in Maplewood Grove. Every time she walked through the neighborhood, a new regulation seemed to reveal itself, each more absurd than the last. Residents were forbidden from painting their houses in anything other than approved shades of beige and gray, while lawn ornaments could only be seasonal and limited to a maximum height of 12 inches. Even flower beds had to be arranged in specific patterns that adhered to HOA guidelines. Feeling a sense of rebellion stir within her, Julia decided to break the mold, albeit in a small way. She placed a cheerful garden gnome at the edge of her flower bed, a whimsical touch that reflected her personality and zest for life. The gnome smiled brightly in the sunlight, bringing her joy as she imagined it greeting every passerby. However, her delight was short-lived. Just days later, a stern notice arrived on her doorstep from the HOA, citing her garden gnome as an unauthorized lawn ornament and threatening a hefty fine if it wasn't removed. The absurdity of it all shocked her. How could anyone consider a harmless gnome a violation? This initial confrontation marked a turning point for Julia. She realized her spirit could not be so easily subdued. Fueled by indignation, she decided to fight back against what she saw as the HOA's overreach into personal expression, setting the stage for her impending rebellion. As the days turned into weeks, Julia's frustration with the HOA grew exponentially. The first fine for her garden gnome was just the beginning. In quick succession, she received multiple warnings for various infractions. Her flower bed was deemed too colorful, an ornamental wind chime was labeled distracting, and her choice of porch furniture was criticized for being unsuitable. Each notice felt like a personal attack on her spirit, and the financial penalties were piling up, straining her already tight budget. Every time she opened her mailbox, dread filled her chest. Behind each white envelope was a reminder of the HOA's arbitrary authority, an imposition that felt increasingly tyrannical. Conversations with other homeowners revealed a similar shared disillusionment. Many were too intimidated to speak out, afraid of retribution from the board. This only intensified Julia's resolve to stand up against what she saw as the erosion of their community's vibrancy. Determined to refuse submission, Julia began documenting every infraction, noting how absurd each rule was when viewed in context. She started to strategize, thinking about ways to rally support from her neighbors and challenge the HOA's draconian measures. She could no longer accept sitting quietly while her vibrant expression was stifled by a faceless authority. Julia knew she had to take action, not just for herself but for all those who felt trapped under the weight of the HOA's regulations. Her rebellious spark was ignited. She was ready to confront the status quo. The annual Maplewood Grove Community Picnic arrived, a much-anticipated event that promised laughter, food, and neighborly bonding. However, as Julia attended with the hopes of fostering connections and perhaps rallying support for her cause, she quickly sensed the oppressive atmosphere dictated by the HOA. The board members circulated through the park, clipboard in hand, monitoring everything with hawkish vigilance. As families set up picnic blankets and children played games, Julia overheard snippets of conversations punctuated by whispers of fear regarding the HOA's reach. A couple lamented about receiving fines for their excessive outdoor seating arrangements, while another family shared how their carefully tended garden was deemed unsightly by board members. It became painfully clear to Julia that the HOA's iron grip extended even into this supposed celebration of community. The turning point came during a speech delivered by Mr. Thompson at the podium, a self-congratulatory monologue about how the HOA maintained order and beauty in Maplewood Grove. His words dripped with arrogance as he outlined recent fines levied against families for minor infractions. The crowd's muted reactions made it evident that many felt powerless. Julia could feel her heart pounding with indignation. This was not just an attack on her individuality but on the spirit of community itself. In that moment, a fierce determination surged within her. She vowed to plot her revenge against the board members who wielded their authority like a weapon. The time had come to turn their oppressive rules into fuel for a movement that would reclaim their neighborhood from tyranny. Fueled by her newfound resolve, Julia began strategizing her attack against the HOA. She organized a clandestine meeting at her home, inviting neighbors she had met at the picnic who shared her disdain for the board's heavy-handed tactics. As the sun set, illuminating her cozy living room with a warm glow, an atmosphere of camaraderie quickly filled the space. Around Julia's dining table, the group exchanged stories of their own encounters with the HOA's absurdities, a mother who received a fine for letting her children play on their own lawn and an elderly couple penalized for hanging a bird feeder deemed unsightly. The shared frustrations sparked laughter, but it also fueled their collective anger. With excitement buzzing in the air, they brainstormed creative approaches to push back. Ideas flowed freely. Some proposed organizing a decorating day, where neighbors could place colorful ornaments in their yards as a display of solidarity, while others suggested staging a peaceful protest at the next HOA meeting to challenge their authority directly. Julia encouraged everyone to think outside the box and be daring. "What if we transformed our lawns into wildflower gardens?" she proposed, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. "It would be a beautiful display against the bland conformity they uphold." The gathering rallied around her vision as they mapped out a plan, a delightful mix of rebellion and creativity that would send a clear message to the HOA. Together, they vowed to reclaim their rights and embrace their individuality, setting in motion a movement to challenge their oppressive overseers. The day of the long-awaited decorating day arrived, and the sense of excitement in Maplewood Grove was palpable. Julia and her neighbors adorned their lawns with vibrant colors, filling their yards with whimsical decorations that defied the HOA's stringent guidelines. As bright flowers bloomed alongside playful garden gnomes, wind chimes danced merrily in the breeze, creating a beautiful tapestry of rebellion that caught the attention of passing cars. Not content with just individual displays, Julia had also organized a peaceful protest at the HOA's next meeting. Armed with colorful signs proclaiming phrases like, "Let us bloom," and "Creativity matters," they planned to peacefully challenge Mr. Thompson and his board. The unification of their efforts showcased the strength in numbers, and for each neighbor who joined, Julia felt her courage swell. As they marched toward the community center, laughter mingled with their chants, instilling a sense of camaraderie among them. But Julia had one last prank up her sleeve. Just before entering the building, she slipped 2 oversized inflatable lawn flamingos onto Mr. Thompson's pristine lawn as their opening statement, a tongue-in-cheek nod to flamboyance and creativity. Inside, as the meeting started, Julia and her neighbors stood together at the front with their protest signs held high. The sight of colorful ornamentation juxtaposed against their otherwise beige surroundings sent shockwaves through the HOA members. The message was clear: they were done being silenced by draconian rules. Julia's heart raced with exhilaration as she realized that this was just the beginning of their fight to reclaim not only their gardens but also their community spirit. The HOA's retaliation was swift and severe. Within days of the decorating day and protest, notices began flooding into the mailboxes of Julia and her neighbors, each one a stark reminder of the board's power. Fines escalated dramatically. What had once been minor penalties for innocuous decorations transformed into hefty fees for violating community standards. Julia found herself facing a staggering amount that threatened her financial stability, and it was clear that Mr. Thompson and his board were determined to reassert control. In addition to fines, the board sent ominous letters threatening legal action against those who continued to defy their rules. Neighborhood meetings became tense battlegrounds, with Julia and her allies on one side and an increasingly hostile HOA on the other. Board members glared at them from their seats, their expressions hardened by indignation. The atmosphere in Maplewood Grove shifted. Fear began to seep into conversations as whispers echoed about potential eviction notices or further punishment for those participating in the rebellion. Some neighbors, once enthusiastic supporters of Julia's cause, began to retreat into silence, wary of risking their homes for what felt like an uphill battle against a seemingly unyielding authority. Yet, amidst the mounting tension, Julia's resolve only deepened. She knew that they had struck a nerve within the HOA. Their actions had exposed the board's vulnerability. Recognizing that retaliation often signaled fear rather than strength, she became more determined than ever to rally her community, believing that together they could challenge this oppressive regime and reclaim not just their yards but their right to individuality. Julia's unwavering determination began to resonate throughout Maplewood Grove. As word spread about her defiance against the HOA, more residents found the courage to voice their frustrations and join the movement. Neighbors who had once felt silenced by fear now came together, united by a shared desire to reclaim their right to individuality and creativity. Homeowners began organizing informal gatherings to discuss strategies for resisting the HOA's oppressive rules. Inspired by Julia's earlier actions, they planned events that showcased their unique perspectives: art fairs, community potlucks featuring homemade decorations, and even a neighborhood talent show that celebrated individual creativity. Each event was designed not only to foster community spirit but also to challenge the HOA's insistence on conformity. As more residents decorated their homes with vibrant colors and expressive yard art, the transformation of Maplewood Grove became a visual testament to their newfound rebellion. Children painted murals on fences with themes of freedom and creativity, while adults proudly displayed handmade signs proclaiming slogans such as "Unity in Diversity" and "Our Homes, Our Art." Even those who had initially been hesitant found themselves swept up in the momentum of change. They began attending HOA meetings in larger numbers, holding signs and speaking out against unjust fines and regulations. The once dominant board members could feel the shift, whispers of dissent echoed louder than ever, and Julia knew they were on the brink of something significant. The burgeoning movement represented more than just a battle against the HOA, it was a reclamation of pride, identity, and the spirit of community in Maplewood Grove. The tension in Maplewood Grove reached a boiling point as the pivotal community meeting approached. Julia knew this was her moment to confront the HOA board directly and rally her neighbors for a decisive stand against the oppressive rules that had stifled their creativity for far too long. Armed with evidence of the board's unfair practices, dozens of documented fines, testimonies from fellow residents, and a collection of photos showcasing their vibrant decorations, she felt an electric mix of anxiety and determination coursing through her. As the day arrived, Julia arrived early to the community center, her heart racing with anticipation. She could see familiar faces filtering in, each one filled with hope and shared resolve. The room began to fill with whispers of support, and she silently thanked the community for standing by her side. When it was time for public comments, Julia took a deep breath and stepped forward to face Mr. Thompson and his fellow board members. She began by recounting her own experiences with their arbitrary regulations, then shifted focus to include stories from her neighbors who had faced similar repercussions. With every word, she felt the weight of their collective frustration behind her. Julia highlighted the absurdity of fines imposed for harmless decorations while revealing how these punitive measures had created division instead of community. The crowd nodded in agreement as she passionately called for change, urging them all to reclaim their right to express themselves freely in their own homes. The atmosphere crackled with solidarity as Julia concluded her speech. It was clear that they were not just fighting for lawn ornaments but for the heart and soul of Maplewood Grove itself. The climax of the confrontation proved to be a moment of undeniable transformation for Maplewood Grove. Bolstered by Julia's impassioned speech and unwavering determination, the residents gathered their strength as they faced the HOA board, their voices united in demand for change. There was a palpable shift in the air as they collectively critiqued the board's outdated rules, exposing the ways in which they had undermined the community spirit. As weeks passed following that pivotal meeting, the pressure on HOA members mounted. Mr. Thompson and his fellow board members found themselves unable to ignore the insurgent spirit of the community. Meetings began to shift in tone, with increasingly bold demands for revisions to the draconian regulations that had governed their lives for too long. Finally, after intense negotiations further fueled by public outcry, it was decided, the HOA would significantly revise its policies to embrace creativity rather than suppress it. The previously rigid rules governing home decor were transformed, allowing residents to express themselves more freely. The board announced new guidelines for colorful decorations and personal expression, showcasing a commitment not just to aesthetics, but to fostering community bonds. For Julia, this journey was not just about changing regulations, it was about personal growth and empowerment. She emerged from the ordeal more confident and assertive, understanding her ability to effect positive change within her community. As she decorated her yard with wildflowers and art, Julia knew that Maplewood Grove had become a space where individuality thrived, a testament to what can happen when people join together for a common cause. The community transformed into not merely a picturesque neighborhood but a vibrant hub of creativity and connection. As Julia stood in her newly adorned garden, vibrant flowers swaying in the gentle breeze, she reflected on the tumultuous journey that had brought her community to this moment. The transformation of Maplewood Grove was more than just a change in regulations, it was a testament to the power of unity and resilience. She thought about how far they had come, from a community intimidated by oppressive rules to one that embraced creativity and self-expression with open arms. Through the challenges and confrontations, Julia learned invaluable lessons about standing up for oneself and the importance of community. The journey had not only strengthened her resolve but also deepened her connections with her neighbors. Each conversation, each act of defiance they shared, had woven a fabric of support that stood strong against the HOA's authority. Julia realized that true beauty lay not only in the aesthetics of their homes but in the spirit of the people who lived within them. By reclaiming their right to individuality, they had fostered a sense of belonging that resonated throughout the entire neighborhood. Looking around at her friends and neighbors, she felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. This experience had transformed them all, imbuing them with courage and a shared purpose. As they continued to cultivate their gardens and decorate their homes with artistic flair, Julia knew they were not just transforming their physical space, they were nurturing a community that thrived on creativity, acceptance, and ongoing growth, one that would stand together against any authority that sought to diminish their spirit.